Welcome back to the Healing You Show with our host Gloria Lybecker, and I'm her co-host Vanessa Harris. And today in episode 14, we're going to be talking about unconscious contracts.
Yes, it's a fascinating topic. Excited to see you again today.
So maybe we can start with, because it's an unusual term, unconscious contracts. Can you explain a little bit about what they are?
Yeah, they actually are.
So how would you describe what an unconscious contract is?
Yeah, I would describe it as a belief system that we're not conscious that we are carrying. And so what that looks like is it'll drive our behavior and show up specifically in different relationships. Maybe you'll start seeing like a repeating pattern of something happening, and you can be curious about it. That's if you notice it. But many people aren't even aware that they don't notice it. It's totally unconscious. And so how they can begin to start becoming aware of it is noticing what they're telling themselves or noticing what they're saying, and how that's affecting their relationships or their environment.
So when you say your first description, there was a belief system. Mm-hmm. And how does that tie into noticing what you're saying? Well, do you mean saying to yourself or saying to others, or
in your mind? Usually it's in your mind, or even sometimes you say it out loud. Maybe you don't realize you're saying it out loud. I've had that happen for people before. And yet, so the things that we tell ourselves silently are the things we really believe. So sometimes those things are really not kind at all. It can be a very harsh internal voice. It can be lacerating.
So could you give me an example of what one of those belief systems or those voices or stories?
Mine, from growing up, mine was, I am stupid, I am dumb, and I am ugly.
Oh.
I mean, stupid and dumb, they're both, but boy, those were like right back to back. And so those were unconscious beliefs. I wasn't really consciously aware, but it's how I perceived myself because of how I was engaged with in relationships with others from a young age.
So the term contract, how does that fit in?
Well, it's like it's a contract we make with what I call our essential self, which would be my highest and best version of me. It's who I truly am, who I was created and born to be. And so in order to survive something that seems unsurvivable, I'll make a contract with myself to never do something again. In the earlier episode, we talked about vulnerability. So maybe I solemnly swear to my essential self, I will never, ever be vulnerable again in order to never have to experience that pain of isolation and rejection. I mean, so depending on what it is, inside our young self innocently is doing our best to protect us. And what it does is sets up a pattern for how we show up in life. And it might have served us in that moment, and especially when it was our young self that made the contract. They don't have all of their middle prefrontal cortex even available to them for their creative imagination. So they can come up with some doozies. Yeah, I've come up with some doozies, and I'm uncovering different ones at different times. What was that one I did? It was about comparison. And so then it diminishes who you really are in present day.
So I'm thinking of a story that someone shared with me once that I think would fit into this description of what and how you're describing they develop often when we're younger. Mm-hmm. So this person was sharing that they had sat in preschool with a girl, and she had convinced him to stick little balls, little marbles or something, some kind of ball that they were playing with, up their noses. Let's stick these things up our noses. This will be really fun. And he stuck them up his nose, but then she didn't. And then his got stuck. And he actually had to have them surgically removed. But he said he remembered in that moment thinking, you can't trust girls, and I will never trust girls ever again. Is that the sort of thing that you're thinking?
Yeah.
And it wasn't something that he said he was aware of until much later, and then realised when he reflected back that he had made this. He just knew. He kind of knew that he just found women, or he had a story that women weren't trustworthy. You couldn't trust a woman, or a girl. Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about? Is that sort of?
Yeah, there is. That is a very good example of one. And so what that would look like is first noticing that you have this tendency or this pattern or this resistance. It can show up in many different ways. I had a person that I was working with the other day that would just notice that if they ever got triggered, that they would just go blank. And because it's just like a cutoff and blank, and there's no words, there's no nothing. It's like, and then just noticing, oh, I guess I'm cut off right now. and it's just like a void there. And being able to slow it down to recognize, what I find to be really helpful is to put your hand on your heart. When you actually put your hand on your heart, and it's like a mindfulness practice. It'd be like a prayer practice, and whatever is meaningful for people to be able to connect with their highest version of themselves. The heart space has so much electromagnetic energy, and it is so powerful that when I connect with my heart and I just ask, when I have something that triggers me in my life, come to my heart and ask for my heart to reveal to me my earliest memory of when did this pattern begin. And then I just breathe in and out of my heart and wait. And it's getting me out of my head. And I'm connecting them with my body's wisdom. So being able to just slow someone down in their process, co-regulating with them, and inviting them to come into their heart space. And to just, as they close their eyes and reflect back over their yesteryear, what image pops up? What comes up for them? And whatever comes, we just go with what the body reveals. And so then I communicate with them. I keep the conversation going for them to unpack it a little bit, but to then start to frame up, well, what would it sound like for this younger self? And so for this one example, it was like, well, the pain, it hurt so much, right? It was a sense of a pain of loss. And so when they get triggered, in order to protect themselves from being left all alone, they just go blank. And so then actually having them say whatever it is the contract was an unconscious contract, and to see what their body says, and then trusting the body's wisdom with how their body responds. And so what that looks like then is to unpack it more fully, would say, and so for myself, I, Gloria Lybecker, solemnly swear to my essential self that I will cut off and go totally blank anytime I'm triggered in relationship with someone, in order to avoid the pain of loss and being left all alone, no matter the cost to myself or those I love. And notice what happens in my body and just rest with it. I don't need to make it shift. I don't need to make it go away or anything, but just notice, where is this in the body, and let it settle where it's at. And then it's the formal contract words actually as a way of acknowledging to our implicit that this was really an important thing.
Because when you were saying those words and I was hearing the wording of what you were describing, what I was thinking was that was bringing this unconscious belief system and contract and naming it and making it really clear and explicit.
Yes.
So taking the implicit into the explicit, and then being able to tune in and see how that feels in your body is what you're describing. And just getting a sense of whether that feels true now.
Congruent. Does it feel congruent?
Right. Yeah. Okay. And
Yeah.
that's a very powerful process that you're describing. And I have had done those processes with you myself and experienced the release. And what you were describing before as well, that you tune in with yourself. I actually had an experience just yesterday and I didn't realize what was happening. But as you're describing it, I was like, oh, I've actually already learned to automatically tune in to that question you asked, when is the first time I ever experienced this?
Mm-hmm.
And I did very quickly go back to this situation, which was a violent situation when I was very, very young. But it didn't even happen to me. It was something I was observing.
Well, and then that's how we can take those on, though, is when we're a witness to something where it's a trauma as well.
Yes. And so for me, it was like, why do I react so strongly to people touching me in this particular way? Like it's not even an aggressive thing. It's just a particular part of my body that I don't like being, touched. And I found myself going, and then just thinking about it, and it instantly went back. And then having that awareness, and there was some grief for me that did come up around that, which I was actually able to process really quickly. But when I'm hearing you go through that process, I hadn't made that link yesterday. That this is an unconscious contract, and I'm releasing it. But having worked with you, that has empowered me to actually be able to go through that process in my daily life.
Yeah. Well, and it's really important to take our time with it. Once we have identified it, there's no have-tos to do anything with it or to it or for it. It's more about slowing down to be with it, to accompany this part that wasn't accompanied. And then in the moment of working with somebody, to slow them down, and after they've said it, say, yeah, that feels really true. Say, okay, if that has settled, are they willing to then shift their body one direction or the other in order to step out of that smaller self and into their higher self, their essential self? And if that feels congruent, like that's doable for them, then they would shift into that and let me know when they're there. And then I would ask them, so higher self of myself or Vanessa, did you hear the contract that your younger self made to you? And then check, did this part hear it? And if there was a little bit of cloudiness, then I might repeat what it was so they can hear it. And there's something for me in my own experiences of doing this, when I actually hear what my younger self said, that she would sacrifice in order to protect me. I'm like, and is that a contract is that a good contract for her to keep? No, absolutely not. I don't want her to keep that contract. And so then there's the power. Then you'd say, then I release you from this contract and I revoke this vow. And naming that to the child or to the last month version of yourself, however it is. If there's something that came up and it packed a wallop, it can happen at any age. And as they release that, then say, and I bestow upon you instead my blessing. And so the person actually tunes in and they know exactly what that younger self needed. And so they can then give them a blessing to restore their potential. Their potential doesn't need to be diminished. And just following that as it comes through until that feels complete, and then shifting back to the child self and noticing, well, how is this to have this contract revoked, right? And to receive the blessing. And it can be so different for each person depending on what their contract was and how their gifts are restored.
So when you say the gifts are restored, I'm thinking about what I'm hearing is you describe the process to dealing with these, and then what does that look like afterwards? Do these unconscious contracts that create these often automatic behaviors and ways of doing things and operating, do they, once they're released, do you find that people notice a change in their behavior or their way of interacting or relating or?
Yes, definitely. And I also want to say that sometimes when they step into their essential self, they're not in the place where they're ready to take that next step to release it. There's something they're still needing to sit with, and it hasn't fully percolated within them in order to be released. There's still something they're learning from this life lesson. And so I don't want anyone to think that that's what they're supposed to do it right, because that is not the field that I hold space for. It's meeting the person where they are in their process and trusting their own innate wisdom and their own capacity to follow their truth. There's no cookie cutter process for anybody. These are guidelines to hold gently and with reverence, because it's really tender ground.
So for me, what you're describing, I've got to the point where with lots of different things where I've noticed patterns, recurring patterns, or that's that thing I do. But just having the awareness and going, oh, that's a thing that I do, or that's my thought, or that's what my belief system is, or my story that I tell myself, whatever words I want to use to describe it, isn't enough for that automatic behavior not to come up. And I used to find myself getting quite frustrated when I think, oh, this is this pattern coming back up again. And I'm back here doing the same thing again. I know this is what I do and I can't. Why do I keep repeating it?
Well, part of it, if you slow down and hear what you were just saying, is you're talking about it in the current present tense. So it's recreating it in the now.
Right.
And one thing that we can begin to do is we can notice a pattern, and then we can talk about it in the past tense. And it can support our system to start to open up to a different possibility. Oh, boy, I used to do this, even if I just did it 5 minutes ago. I used to do that all the time. And now I'm becoming more and more aware of it. So the way I just communicated that, it opens up a brand new door for me to step through. And that's the practice, is really noticing, what am I telling myself and what am I telling everybody else? What do I keep recreating? Telling myself I want something different, and I keep doing the same thing over. And that again, when we can start to hear ourselves from our heart without judgment, without shame or blame, and start to open up a new door for ourselves of possibilities. Freedom.
Oh, yes. I like that, freedom. Yeah. Because it's kind of like these unconscious contracts are like ties. I kind of visualize things like that, like they're kind of holding me in a set pattern. And going through and breaking those unconscious contracts, it's like we're cutting those, and I'm free to move. I'm not a puppet on a string anymore.
Yeah.
I can move the way I want to.
Another thing that I've done at different times, depending on the client and how they are with energy dynamics, is there are times I will pull out my imaginary great big golden shears, and I will cut all around them. I've used this to cut around myself when I would have a sense that there was like something sticking to me that wasn't mine. And these shears are so powerful. They can cut any energy that does not belong to you, but they never can cut through anything that is love-based and really is serving your life. But everything else will fall away. And you can actually feel the difference in your body when you do this. It's kind of a purification kind of ritual even. Or you can just bring in sparkles, golden shimmers of light, and feel it coming into your whole sense of self and just washing all over you, cleansing you. And those can be very, very helpful too, depending on the person and what their body is okay with, is comfortable with. It's always important to have consent when you're working with people.
So it sounds like you're visualizing, or you're using visual pictures and strategies, that suit each person and to help their nervous system find a new pattern and to releasing. So I've heard some people, you know, writing is really powerful for them. The visual thing I find really helpful. That's just where my mind always has gone since I was a child.
Yeah, and when you can bring movement into, it can be really supportive as well. So that's kind of why I do this, or different, whatever pops in the moment, I will go with.
And
And
so
so,
those processes, the movement, everything is all plugging into all of the senses of the nervous system
mm-hmm.
and actually helping that to create. Is that what's happening? Is it creating a new
Yeah,
pathway or a new pattern?
yeah. Well, it's releasing a neural net. So what happens when we have any kinds of trauma is it puts a little stuck place in. And so instead of a line that goes smoothly along, you know, the journey, it's going along, all of a sudden it starts just spiraling in one spot, and it's just kind of stuck there. Yeah. So when you can release it, then it doesn't spiral, it starts to come through. And with repetition, then this path gets stronger, and the neural net, it just dissipates because it's not used anymore. So another really effective strategy that I will teach people is with their magic fingers. Because when you can use the tapping techniques, these are meridian points for acupressure. And when you're thinking about whatever it is and the emotions and the feelings, and you do this tapping, it actually starts to activate your vagus nerve in a different way and supports your whole sense of self to open and expand more to where you can begin to experience life differently. So I like to teach that right up front. So they always have those with them.
So what I'm hearing is that you've got a bunch of techniques that you use that all link back in to our biology, our nervous system, and what you were describing before about creating the new pathway and laying down the new pathway. Is that what I hear people talking about as neuroplasticity?
Yes, yes. We're never too old for that. It's never too late. We can change our nervous system. We can open it up, and we can be empowered to live our lives on purpose and open-heartedly, speaking our truth and supporting others to do the same. We can keep paying that forward. And so the neuroplasticity is when we have that accompaniment, so that our body can catch that flavor of what it's like to be gotten and to be welcomed and to be safe and secure, to really rediscover our own innate worthiness and develop our capacity for self-connection and self-love. Then we can go out in our world and we can start offering that to others.
So when you say neural pathways and neuroplasticity, we're actually talking about the nervous system and new pathways in the brain.
Yeah, we
But
make new linkages. We make new linkages inside.
But I'm hearing you describe not just the brain and not just the brain connections, but the mind or the brain and the body connection.
Yeah, so most of the world tends to do top-down processing, and they get really stuck up here. But these practices that I'm inviting people into, they're bottom-up processes, which with our vagus nerve especially, 80 to 90% of information is coming up through the brainstem. Then it's telling our body what to do next.
Okay.
So when we can begin to reconnect to our body's wisdom, we can actually be in more full choice.
Wow, so it's very powerful, and it sounds like there's a lot of different modalities that you're drawing upon there to link in order to break these unconscious contracts.
Or to dissolve them.
Dissolve. I like that word.
I like that better than breaking things. I like to just be very gentle and untangle them, so that the connections can find their way to where they were meant to go in the first place. It's just like the nervous system had a little distortion, a hiccup. Well, I don't want to make a hiccup a bad thing. I want to soothe it so that it doesn't need to continue to hiccup. So if we can be really gentle, just like we would with an infant, we need to be that kind and that gentle, especially when we have experienced trauma.
Yeah. And so what could people do as a first step for themselves if they were, because I'm guessing that anyone who may be watching this and is talking about unconscious contracts might be first starting to notice their own unconscious contracts. Sort of like when you go shopping for a red car and then suddenly you just see red cars everywhere. What could they do as a first step for themselves?
Practice kindness for themselves. When they notice a pattern, notice what they automatically tell themselves about the pattern, and maybe play with the language a little bit, you know? So being able to, like we had just said, to recognize how we say something and start to open the door for possibility for something to be different.
And if that door, so what if people identify something that they think, yes, this is a pattern that I can see, this that I would like to dissolve. How can they reach you if they wanted to do that in more depth?
Yeah, well, I would welcome anyone to have a conversation with me, and I do offer free 30-minute consultations to explore what might be a good fit for people. And you can reach me at healingyouShow.com. And on the top, I think it's on the top right-hand corner, there's a get in touch with Gloria or schedule with Gloria, and it'll take you right into my calendar where you can schedule a free consultation. And I'd love to hear from you. Any of those things. Yeah.
I would thoroughly recommend it, having gone through that process, I can say.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information there.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Vanessa. This has been a really fun, engaging conversation with you. I enjoyed them so much. And
I just want to say I really learned a lot. Even having gone through the process myself, I'm now seeing it and understanding it in a whole different way. So
yeah.
I'll really enjoy going away and noticing a few of my own. And we'll reconnect next time and look at the next step. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Vanessa. Bye.
Thanks.